Great, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alastair from Bloomberg. I cover ESG and sustainability topics on the news side. So I'm very interested in today's conversation, especially the focus on trust. And we are at a juncture, I think, where businesses of all types and all shapes and sizes are rushing to embrace sustainability and ESG topics. I mean, I just have to look at my inbox on a daily basis for new announcements on net zero commitments or some new sustainability strategy, and it's kind of overwhelming how much noise is being generated on a corporate level at the moment. And so I think that this panel gives us an opportunity to step back and ask, how much can we trust what's being said? How can we verify what's being said? Is this companies jumping on a marketing bandwagon? ESG is a wonderful marketing opportunity, or is there some real substance behind this? Greenwashing is what I'm really referring to here when I talk about seizing the marketing opportunity, and that's the great scourge, or the potentially a great scourge of this moment, where we talk about shifting from a model of shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism, where companies care about a vast array of stakeholders, such as their employees, their clients through the supply chain, and so on. So essentially what we want to ask in this panel session is what it takes to build lasting trust as a corporate leader, not just a momentary flash in a pan statement or announcement, but what does it mean over the long term to prove that you're committed to sustainability and ESG topics? And how can we verify those things? How can technology play a role in that? Does technology help us to uncover and shed light on these issues, or does it actually serve to only muddy the waters? So that's essentially where we're going. We've only got 20 minutes, and I think there's a lot of ground to cover, but I'm delighted that we've got two very well-equipped people to speak on this. They are essentially your hosts for today. We have Marjella Lecourt-Alma, who's the CEO of Datamaran, and then the CTO of Datamaran, who's Jérôme. So thank you both very much for joining this conversation and joining me. I'm speaking at a rate of knots because, as I say, I think we have lots to cover. Let me just crack on with the very first question, and that is, how can one, as a corporate leader, build trust in today's era of ESG and sustainability, where talk is cheap but action is costly? Marjella, maybe I could ask you to start.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alastair. And also, I think it's quite telling how the media is now involved in covering ESG and corporate sustainability related stories, which is also definitely part of this entire arena getting more mainstream. But back to your question on trust. Looking at 2020, I think both ESG and digital transformation were put into an accelerator program. Right. You know, ESG has been climbing the corporate ladder really, really fast. And in the last 18 months or so, it's been taking the fast elevator up. And what that means is that we're seeing now that the demand for wanting to understand ESG and wanting to do something about it is coming directly from C-suite and from boards, from leadership. And for the longest time, a lot of activity around corporate sustainability and CSR was taking place in quite a siloed fashion within corporations, but also within professional services firms and within the investment community. So how you build trust when it comes to ESG strategies, depending on, it doesn't matter what kind of player you are, is really about integration, putting it at the heart of your organization, and focusing on the foundation first before you push out that story externally.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Jérôme, maybe I could bring you in at this point. How would you answer that question?
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for asking. From a technology standpoint, what we want to achieve is really what you pointed out. We want to help those business executives get access to that new types of information that they're looking for. Mm-hmm. So the technologist there is trying to listen to those new questions that are surfacing, this new appetite that Marjella mentioned, and find ways to uncover the insight that will help those business executives make the right decision and help them build the trust that they're trying to get to.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we're going to get back to the technology point in a minute. I'm keen to drill down a bit on that. But Marjella, you in your comments made an interesting and I think pertinent observation that, you know, ESG and sort of the sustainability function used to be kind of a niche, often a niche team sat somewhere in the corner, but now it's sort of, as you said, transferred to the C-suite. Do you think, though, that you know, perhaps there's a deficit of perhaps understanding or expertise at the C-suite level? In the sense, obviously, that niche team before were dedicated only to ESG. That was their sole purpose, whereas the C-suite has to cover, you know, all the risks and all the things that are facing a company. Do you think that, you know, perhaps there's a kind of a journey of education that they need to go on, or is this part of a broader theme? At the beginning, we heard this comment about how it's a process of, you know, risks that were once seen as, you know, just externalities were not really relevant to the business, are now starting to become more central. And so ESG, whether it be diversity topics, whether it be, you know, how you're taking care of your workers, or whether it be climate change, they're all just part of what it means to be a senior executive anymore at the moment.
Yeah, no, I think it has to come from two directions. So on the one hand, you know, you have many companies have a lot of ESG expertise in-house. Mm-hmm. Now the question is, will they get a seat at the table? And I think we have seen, you know, with our clients that new collaborations started to arise. So collaborations between corporate sustainability, investor relations, risk, legal. So that's, you know, one way in which this expertise can, you know, find its way up. But we've also seen that there's a lot of demand and interest now in further education of, you know, board members, you know, different organizations that consist of board networks, looking for, you know, programs on ESG and finding that knowledge. So I think it has to come from both directions. Typically, corporate sustainability experts cover a vast arena of topics. And I think in order for that to really find its way into the C-suite, there's a need for evidence. So you know, data-driven evidence as to why certain issues matter more than others, but also in terms of language, you know, talking about ESG in the context of risk and opportunity. So it also resonates with senior leaders. So it's a movement that's going up and a movement that should come down. And then, of course, also around the company, engagement with stakeholders and with the larger value chain is another aspect of that as well. So it's not an easy journey, but I think in terms of technical expertise, we've come a long way. But in terms of kind of starting again, like this is a reset, you know, C-suite getting involved, mm-hmm. I think we should almost treat it as the beginning of the journey again, to see how we can best roll it out. Okay.
Well, that gives me an opportunity to come to you again, Jérôme, on the technology and data side. So Marjella has just mentioned that in, you know, there's this very well-worn phrase in ESG that basically, if you don't measure it, you know, you can't change it. And so looking at the data side, and of course that is one of the greatest criticisms of the ESG space, especially on the investing side, is that the data that supports decision-making is lacking, shall we say, or at least incomplete. I wonder from your side, how do you see technology as being an enabler? I know that you have particularly strong views on AI, and I'd be keen to hear about those, but perhaps you could just start by speaking more broadly about how technology can enable the C-suites, the decision makers, when it comes to ESG.
Sure. So I think the first point, I think you're right. It's technology is there to enable, not to replace. The technology is there to first help the decision maker in making better decision in a faster way. And the other dimension there, and this is where the technology also has been able to contribute a lot is that it also allowed us to go towards new sources. So you no longer have to just look at what is being reported in a numeric manner that is not directly comparable. That has been also very often the type of feedback that I've heard is that, you know, people are reporting on their Esg emission, etc., but it's not comparable. So technology and techniques like the one we're using, natural language processing or sensor data, etc., allow us to get access to new sources that otherwise executive would not have access to, and also it allows us to analyze that in new ways that really allow us to transform what is not measurable slowly, step by step, into indicators that are getting better and better at measuring it and applying, you know, a hard science approach to make sure that we not only develop indicator, but, you know, we learn from them and we improve them as we go. So that's a bit the approach there, I think.
Could you share a couple of examples of you know, how technology has advanced in such a way as to enable new analysis and new insights?
Sure. So I think, well, I would be better off talking about what we do. I think it's than trying to get examples from other fields. So what the area that we followed and where we focused a lot of our energy at Datamaran has been about trying to model the discussion, the way companies and new regulators and reporters talk about ESG. So we put a lot of time modeling that. That's what we call our ontology. And we apply techniques like natural language processing to help us really identify and then quantify how companies are and stakeholders are taking into account those elements, you know. So taking a more precise example, if you look at how a company disclose in their financial reports, you know, what type of issues are they mentioning as part of the CEO letter? What type of issue is mentioned in their risk sections? How are they talking about that? Are they just describing it, or are they disclosing actions that they're taking? Are they talking about programs? So technology, so for instance, again, focusing on that example of analyzing how people write, how written text really has made a lot of improvement towards allowing us to build models that slowly allow us to get to that type of insight. Though, you know, 7 years ago when we started, the type of insight that we had nothing to do with what we can do right now. That's also the part of the technology has improved, but also our understanding and the understanding of the people and our stakeholders have evolved a lot. And we are slowly making progress towards being able to better quantify and transform what was not measurable into elements that can be measured.
Sure. Thank you. I did put you on the spot there a little bit, so thank you for coming back with an answer. Marjella, maybe I could come back to you. One of the comments I mentioned at the beginning was this idea of greenwashing. And, you know, that is, in some ways, that's almost the worst thing I think that could be said about it, or one of the worst things that could be said about a company, kind of one of the worst accusations you could level at a company, in terms of that is the reputational liability that comes from being accused of, you know, overstating or misrepresenting or pretending to do something that you're not really doing. And of course, this issue of trust is kind of central to greenwashing. Are you really doing what you're saying you're doing? Perhaps you could just, we could conclude, we've only got 3 minutes left, but I'd be really interested to hear a couple of thoughts from you on how this sort of building of trust and how these kind of, you know, you said we're at a new beginning, how executives can think and plan and strategize to kind of avoid being caught in that trap or avoid being labeled with the greenwashing brush, because as I say, that's kind of a reputational hit that you don't really want.
No, exactly. So yeah, what you're asking me is how do we know if a company is taking ESG seriously? How can we trust that?
Exactly.
And in that case, it's all about governance. You know, it all starts with how have you governed this space? Where does it sit? How's the board involved? But also where, you know, once we get to measurement and reporting, where does it get reported? So an interesting stat is that, you know, a couple of years back, I think it was 2007, 2008, we saw a handful of mentions of ESG in the Form 10K.
Right.
Now it's growing exponentially. It's doing the famous hockey stick. And to me, that is evidence that ESG is being taken more seriously by those companies, because otherwise the topic or those topics individually would not make it into the Form 10K. So governance, who's involved, who's at the table, who's signing off. Do you have your data audited and verified like you do with your financial data? Budget structure, executive compensation, rewarding good ESG performance. So I think there's all these ways in which we can evaluate companies like in that way. It's less about looking at the specific ESG metrics. That is important as well, but it's secondary. I think the first step is you want to know who's behind it, and if you can trust those individuals who are in charge, and then the processes that they've put in place.
Thank you. That's a good part to end on, because, you know, the last year there's been a lot of talk about the hierarchy of ESG. It's clearly not an equal trinity. A lot of the focus has been, you know, disproportionately on the E. COVID taught us that we should focus a lot on the S, but actually what you're saying is perhaps G trumps it all. So that's
G first, I would say, yeah.
That's fantastic. Okay, I think I better wrap it up there. I can see Ian back on the chat. But thank you both so much for your insights and your time. It's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alastair.